Welcome to Chapter 1 of Workplace Health and Safety. The course is going to focus, as is obvious, on occupational health and safety issues. And we're going to try and make sure that people are clear as to what is covered, the recourse that employees who get injured have, and we're going to talk about the financial and social costs. I'll also talk about the responsibilities of employers and employees to workplace health and safety. You can see the statistics, which are really rather sad, that in Canada, we have approximately 1,000 workers per year die as a result of workplace incidents. Now, that's not always accidents at work. And 240,000 suffer lost time injuries. Both very sad statistics. Now you can see that over the years, the number of fatalities has actually stayed somewhat constant, which is actually in one way a positive. In the 10 years from 2004 to 2014, the population and the number of employees would have actually increased. So as a percentage, it would have gone down, even though it's still way too high with the number of people who've had fatalities at work. Lost time injuries, you can see, vary by province. It's a bit misleading because of course, Quebec and Ontario being the most populous provinces. Manitoba is listed, as you can see, and a lot of it can depend on the type of industry that are there. So things like forestry is dangerous, mining is dangerous, oil and gas is very dangerous, and manufacturing would tend to be more dangerous than certainly service types of industries. So a hazard is, as you can see, is a source of potential adverse health effect. It doesn't have to be the obvious, like a cut or a scrape or an injury in that regard. And chemicals, biological, physical, psychological, which we're going to talk about in this course. You have occupational health and safety programs, which I know that some of you have participated in or been aware. So you can see cuts, fractures, sprains, amputations, etc., etc. And a lost time injury requires you to miss time from work. So businesses pay a lot of attention to this because most jurisdictions penalize heavy users of workers' compensation. So if your company has high rate of injuries, then you're going to pay more. And you can see occupational illness, exposure to environmental factors, gases, chemicals, biohazards. You can see that some of the history of this goes back a very long time to stonemasons and potters breathing in the dust and black lung for the coal mines, people dying young age because they were breathing the coal dust. And so it became more responsible for the employer to obviously try to prevent injuries and not just say, well, that's what the job takes. So, you know, there's also the fact that people brought it on themselves. They're accident prone. Now, in this particular case, you can see that protective equipment, you can see in the diagram, the picture, that this is not how they cut down a tree today, not only just with the tools, but standing on the whatever it is, the wood or the plank, and no face coverings, no upper body protection. In fact, they're shirtless. So there's been, for a long time, jurisdictions now about, you can see heating, lighting, ventilation, hygiene, etc. And of course, reporting of any accidents. Well over 100 years ago, in the 1889 to be exact, they started establishing the Royal Commission, being the establishing standards and also compensating victims of accidents, regardless of who was at fault. It's because employer would always say, oh, the employee should have, could have, would have type of thing. And it doesn't really matter how the accident occurred, but it occurred. And somebody may be financially harmed by this, along with their physical and psychological harm. Almost 50 years ago now, the three rights. This is really critical, as you've heard me talk about in our regular live lectures. The right to refuse dangerous work without penalty. The right to participate and identify and correcting health and safety problems. So it's not just an employer responsibility. Employees need to be active. And the right to know about hazards. Oh, did I not mention that you're going to be, breathing in these fumes? Oh, no, you need to let people know. And WHMIS was 1988. And again, identifying the rights of workers to know about potential hazards. So that is a little more current. And then even criminal charges, not just fines, but actually criminal charges where people can be put in jail. And they've done the same thing with accounting too, with the violations in accounting. It's not just a fine that you pay, because some of these wealthy people, fining them $1 million is just, they don't even notice it. But putting them in jail, they definitely notice that. All right. It's a heavy cost to GDP with the workplace injuries at 4%. There's also a feeling that it's underestimated, that not all injuries are accurately reported, like they'll cover it up. And some injuries may be, or illnesses may be, exacerbated, as they say, made worse by the exposure to workplace conditions. So somebody who is slightly asthmatic or has asthma, they're fine. But when they go into a workplace that has, say, a lot of dust or whatever triggers their asthma, then they may have coughing fits and things like that. Same as somebody who may be epileptic and there's like flashing lights that can cause a seizure. And the bottom line of this is people have the legal right to safe workplaces. They are expected to have due diligence. In other words, a certain standard of conduct, as you can see, and take every reasonable precaution. In the course, I've mentioned at certain times where employers have now tried to, I like this phrase, engineer out the human factor. So the example that I used in class was, if you're standing beside a press and you just pull down a lever, occasionally, it only takes once, you might leave your other hand exposed and the press comes down in your hand. Or they can make the press, you have to use both hands to pull the lever down, or the levers in this case, pull it down. So it won't work if you just try and pull it on one side, it won't operate. The other way to do that is to move the button or the item that causes the press to close. You physically move it away from the spot that the press is, that you can, even if you tried to put your hand underneath, you are too physically far away, so you can't, because all it takes is one mistake in 20 years of work and you have a hand that doesn't work like it used to. Again, the safety is the right focus for employers. Employers realize that people getting injured is bad for morale and people will quit. And if the employer doesn't care, people will leave. I know as a former student of mine who worked for a place where, and it wasn't really maybe the employer didn't care, but it was very toxic for people trying to actually physically injure others at work. She left because of that. And employers understand the cost of workers' compensation is very heavy if they don't do this properly. It's not just something we'll pay lip service to. Right. And workers also have the responsibility to learn about and enact safety and health practices and protocols. And so you can see some of the groups or stakeholders and the employers and employees who are involved in both. Legislation is obviously a big part of it. Occupational health and safety, workers' compensation. We'll talk about some of these in more detail. So you need to have written policies and procedures. You need to maintain your equipment, provide protective devices, and make sure that if people are not performing the work properly, they don't have their safety equipment on, you have the right to discipline them. You have the right to send them home, and if they continually do it, you would fire them for not following the safety practices. Even though they might say, well, it's my choice. No, it's not. And let alone the fact that it could potentially injure other people. It's not always just the employee that gets hurt. It could be their coworkers, and you do not want that. So employees have responsibilities also, and they need to be responsible. So going to work where you are intoxicated or on pharmaceuticals, right, would, when I've worked in certain places years ago, there were some employees who had come to work who were fairly out of it. And we really didn't want to work with those people because they might cause injury to us because they did not have their full faculties operating. And again, wearing protective equipment, wearing earplugs, safety goggles, hard hats, things along that side. And unions have been a big part of this to put pressure on all of the parties to incorporate proper safety practices. And a big part of it is the right to refuse without penalty, refuse work without penalty. And obviously for employers to let people know what the hazards are. Again, you see that there's always going to be some employers who say, like, we need to get this done. To heck with safety. It's a nice to have. No, it's a must have. And employers who just, if they know there's going to be an audit, they clean up. Just like if you know you're going to have company, you may clean up your place more than if you're just there by yourself. So obviously there's partnerships, emphasis on the shared goals to facilitate the partnerships. Partnerships between the employer, the employees, and if there's a union. Not all places have unions. And obviously with workers' compensation and industry associations. A lot of employers now realize the importance of this. They're not paying lip service to it. It's good business to have your employees safe, to have them, remember, if an employee has something like a cut, so the employee gets a cut, they have to go and get treatment on it. Depending on the size of the organization, some organizations even have nurses on site or healthcare provider. Well, that employee is not working while they're getting their cut done. Oh, the cut got infected. Now the employee is going to be off work for 7 to 10 days as the antibiotics take effect. And now you've lost a very valuable, productive employee. And perhaps their replacement employee is not as competent. But employers realized that it's good business to keep their employees safe. Not just, oh, it's good to have. And again, workplace wellness promotion, training your people on occupational health and safety. It goes on and on these days. And it's very much usually under the HR area. that organizes this. I know at Red River College, even believe it or not, I had to take training about a week ago, and yeah, assessing hazards of work. And I'm thinking, I'm online, I'm not in the campus, but no, it's mandatory. There's no, I have to take it. So whether I'll ever set foot in the Red River campus, uh, one never knows. But it's I still had to take the training. And these days with the pandemic and stuff, there's also the employer, if you're working from home, the employer has responsibilities to make sure that your place is set up ergonomic, like an ergonomic setting. And this is going to, with the pandemic, this is going to be more and more prevalent, and has been a trend for many years, even before the pandemic, with regards to more and more employees working from home, and the employer's responsibility to make sure that their work environment is properly set up. Traditionally, you can see the safety emphasized the engineering aspect, education and enforcement, but that's not complete. And because you need to focus more on the people. And again, the training of the people and making sure that they know what they're supposed to do. Safety reduces costs. Employers doesn't increase costs. It might be subtle because, for example, the accounting people will measure the increase in costs of workers' compensation, but they don't measure the loss of productivity. Accounting is incomplete. So the managers know, well, we only produced 50 today, and if that injured person had been at work, our best employee on that, we would have produced 60. That costs the company money, let alone the morale or the poor morale. Getting people injured is bad business. All right, so here's some links for you. And that's the end of chapter number 1.